There's a lot of things Rascal Does Not Dream comments on, and quite possibly the biggest one it focuses on is emotional maturity. The series is focused on the emotional state of teenagers and, most currently in this book, adults of all kinds of backgrounds. And it does this with the concept of adolescent syndrome, where their thoughts and feelings form supernatural situations that can only be solved by resolving the origin of those feelings. This is where emotional maturity comes in. To understand your situation and to choose the right actions is a great sign of emotional maturity, and it is how you solve adolescent syndrome. Every single bit of adolescent syndrome is sorted by being mature and doing the right thing in response to the situation you've been put into. Or could have been solved by doing that, because there is one case that isn't solved like that. Right before we get into that, everything I will talk about in this video is going to spoil something about this wonderful series. I will be basing it off the light novels, these motherfuckers over here, because it's easier. I will be basing it off of the light novels because I own them and it's easier to write based across them. So if lines don't make sense to you anime onlys, read the light novels. The characters differ from each adaptation. So the Sakata you will learn about today is a vastly different beast from what you get in the anime. That's nothing against the anime or the light novels, it's just different characters from different characterizations. I prefer the light novel Sakata, I'm gonna be real with you. The case that is not solved by being mature and doing the right thing is the very first case the series happens to tell us about. The case of the disappearing wild bunny girl, Mai Sakurajima. Mai very much liked not being seen for quite a while, but it still worried her, despite her not even hinting at it to Sakata. It's obvious that she was, by her actions of hunting down someone who can see her, and the fact that Sakata later mentions that it's terrifying not to be perceived and you get desperate. Mai had been on a hiatus and was quite liking the lack of attention, because the media, especially the Japanese, is suffocating. So this led Mai and Sakata to falsely believe that the blame lay with that feeling. And despite him liking her attention and the interactions they had, Sakata wasn't afraid to get to the heart of the matter, and caused a 2-week fight between the two. And by the time they had realised that the blame did not belong to Mai enjoying the lack of attention, she was already ka-fucked. And a reasonable spur-of-the-moment decision caused them to get further away from the source. You mean, running away. And when they finally found out what makes someone unable to perceive Mai, Sakata was the only one who could see her. His desperation caused Mai to give up a single day before he and his little buddy found the solution, causing both members of the Down Syndrome Destroyers to be confused by their own attempts to help. And then Sakata goes to take his iconic shit. He does that a lot. So why is this not a mature action? Well, shouting a confession across a school so she could be perceived again was the least mature option they had during the entire situation. Granted, they hadn't realised, but it doesn't change anything. A confession should be a private thing, not something you send screenshots of to your friends. But he had to make it public so she could be real again. There was many things that went wrong during this entire situation. Mai taking it lightly, assuming why it's happening. Her having a 2-week fight with Sakata, who was just trying to help, because of something he didn't learn of until later. Granted, he was trying to piss her off, but still, you know. And them assuming it ended without actual proof. Mai making him sleep in an attempt to stop him from suffering. To be fair, the last one would have led to the same result. I am not blaming the characters for ending up at the result they did, because it ended better off for Sakata. Well, I wouldn't call that better off. But I'm just simply saying that this is the only one that was not solved by someone's emotional maturity. But it involved quite a bit of it, to be fair. A big part of emotional maturity is understanding when and when not to follow the words of the room. Most people can read the room, whereas the mature people know when it's appropriate to ignore it. This is not me saying this, but the series. And specifically, the Petite Devil story. Tomoe Koga is so painfully obvious of the atmosphere in the room. She's a stranger to city life and so wants to fit in. She changed her hair, her accent, her behaviour patterns, and tries to fit in. And that led to her moniker setting in, when she reached a situation where she wouldn't be reading the room no matter what action she took. And you may state that the ending of this story is all because of Sakata's emotional maturity. But it takes a whole lot of maturity to realise by yourself that your friends aren't friends if they don't stay with you because you rejected their crush. Koga likes what she created and painfully tries to keep up with her new lifestyle. So much so that she will drag anyone not involved down so that she can keep it up. Dragging Sakata into her avoidance of ruining her friends had brought a new perspective into her life. An outcast with 2 whole friends who publicly asked a nationally known celebrity out. What Sakata brought to her life was the knowledge that fitting in might not always be the answer. Tomoe consistently gets confused to Sakata's actions and preferences, not understanding his point of view. To her, annoying her friend would get her kicked out the friendship group, but Sakata believes that everyone is annoying at points, and having people you can be yourself around is better than being fake. And Tomoe isn't fake. She worked hard to change, and worries that it isn't her despite liking every aspect of the her she created. It took a long while for Toga to actively ignore the atmosphere of her surroundings, because if she had before then, all her hard work changing and trying so hard would have fell down the drain. The first time she ignored it was when she decided to help Nana. She chose this action because she couldn't just ignore someone in trouble, as the schoolgirl of justice, and likely because her friends would never find out about it. And the second time was when she made Sakata loop 3 times because she had a crush on him. This is the one that follows 0 rules. What she wants to do is fit in to not lose her friends, and specifically Sakata. He had done so much for her, and they had already promised to be best friends. Ignoring the atmosphere here had the chance to ruin it all. She knew how much Sakata liked Mai Sakurajima. Everyone at their school knew how much he liked her. And she had specific anecdotes to back it up. She had direct evidence that she was in a losing battle. Yet she ignored all of that to try and Stockholm Syndrome him. We know how much he loves Mai Sakurajima. She clearly doesn't. And it hit her like a van sliding on ice. By the time Sakata was tired of her shit, it was over. Sakata rarely ever goes soft on people, even if they are at their most vulnerable. And she is no exception. If Ryo Futaba isn't an exception, then she definitely isn't. And to be fair, he was in the right and chose the right action. She would have gone on forever and it would have gotten worse for both of them each time. Sakata tells her she doesn't need to get rid of her feelings for him, but that the lie ends, and when forced to face and open up about her emotions, he uses the words he knows how to use best. Well done and good job. And as the book said, he said it as softly as he knew how to. But the maturity doesn't come from Sakata in this book, because the lie would have continued way past that confrontation without Koga. What she learnt from Sakata is that it's good to ignore the room sometimes. I mean, she did fall for him despite his sexual harassment. You know, the specific time she learnt this? When Sakata beat up Japanese Bill Lambier. I mean, Dr. J would work too. What Sakata had shown off in this fight was that if you go along with the crowd, bad things can happen. Like bad boy Bill over there saying she's on some Wilt Chamberlain numbers, and I'm not talking 100 points in one game if you know what I'm saying. In that moment, she knew what it was like to be Sakata, or one fraction of my pain when Josh messages me. And she didn't like any of the attention she was garnering. She was embarrassed. And do you know what she took from that? She knew damn well that it could end up in the same situation if she started from the beginning with no solid plan for the future. But she knew that she can always get different friends, and even if she didn't, she would have had Sakata. She may not be the most emotionally mature in the series because as far as we know, she continued the same habits with new friends. But it takes a lot of maturity to understand that sacrifice is sometimes needed, and it's fine to ignore the atmosphere, to reject a scumbag who plays with women more than the sport he's known for. Thinking back on it, the rejection was quite simple. Understanding yourself and what's going on in your head is a big part of this series, and the person that is often there giving out scientific theories to the problems at hand shows this quite well with her book. The logical witch is oftentimes harsh with her friend, Sakata, and overly agreeing with her other friend, Yuma Kunami. And the first thing to point out is that she was quite perceptive towards the love life of Sakata Azusagawa. She watched him go from hopeful to heartbroken with Shoko Makinohara, and then watched him play by play start a relationship with the most famous 18-year-old in the country, and then correctly guessed that his relationship with the peach-ass devil was fake as fuck. But did you notice that she was the first person to comment on the fact that Sakata had a crush on Mai Sakurajima? And it wasn't the note. The first moment I can remember off the top of my head was during the phone call, but I think there was times before. And it was clear that she had no bone in her body that didn't believe he had a crush on the previous child star. By the time they eventually went out, she had already had the thoughts that she was alone again. She was fine being alone before high school, but Sakata and Yuma had changed her whole perspective on that. They were too fun to be around. And from there she created her OnlyFans account. What she wanted to gain from the OnlyFans account was attention. The likes and comments giving off a different type of attention than what the likes of Sakata would give her with his sexual harassment. But she didn't want to acknowledge that she wanted the attention. She begged to herself that she didn't like the attention, and it caused my stupid threesome comment in my last Bunny Girl video. I'll call them Housewife Futaba and OnlyFans Futaba. The main difference is that OnlyFans Futaba accepts that she wants the attention and she continues to post there. What Housewife Futaba says is that OnlyFans Futaba is fake because she cannot accept that she would want attention because she is lonely. And a her that accepts that and continues to hunt for that attention cannot be her. So to simplify it, OnlyFans Futaba knows she's lonely now that the boys are taken but continues to post to OnlyFans despite not liking it. Housewife Futaba refuses to know that anything's wrong, especially towards Sakata, someone she knows would try his damnedest to help. So both sides taking the path of least resistance to deal with their shared problems. And the person who is normally the MVP refuses to be civil about it and decides to show her the harsh reality. This is the first book where Sakata acts downright harsh to the sufferer of adolescent syndrome, rightfully so. When I first watched this anime, it jumped to my top 5 for 2 reasons. It was strikingly similar to the at the time number 4 spot, and that was Kokoro Connect. And the other one was that the relationships between the characters felt real. The relationship between Sakata and his friends is oftentimes spouted by him to be something along the lines of, I don't need many as long as they are my friends for life. And if I call them at 3 a.m. to ask for a favour, they should begrudgingly agree. He never wants someone to do something without complaining if they want to complain, because that would be fake as fuck. But this book shows exactly how he would act for a pre-established friend. At no point does he do something fully against Futaba's wishes, only deleting her account when given permission. At most he mildly harasses Housewife Futaba when sitting outside his bathroom and asking her questions, something OnlyFans Futaba makes him do to make sure she doesn't get ambushed or something, I don't really know. Everything OnlyFans Futaba does to make sure she's okay after getting IP tracked by some guy online is the exact same thing Sakata offered to Housewife Futaba, even down to sitting outside the bath, showing that she very much appreciated him doing all those things for her despite Housewife Futaba's disagreements. Sakata knew damn well that the best he could do was show her that he was there for her, and this was something she had to entirely solve by herself. Calling the anime equivalent of Ryan Reynolds at 3 a.m. to prove his earlier statement was to show her that just because he has a girlfriend doesn't mean he won't be there for her too. One call solved retired OnlyFans Futaba's problems, but it caused much more for Housewife Futaba. because she was too delusional to understand that OnlyFans Hall of Fame member Futaba was her too. What OnlyFans Futaba learned was that she was lonely and she was afraid that her boys were going to leave her because of their much more appealing girlfriends. And it seems like Dr. Curry Futaba didn't understand it at all. But what it is that she does know she's lonely but refuses that she is, because that would mean that she wanted the attention. But to be the one to ask OnlyFans or defense member Futaba shows that she had accepted it. She fully understood what had caused all her problems, and when they hung out at the beach for the festival, she took her final action while keeping herself away from the answer so she doesn't make it her final action, you know? I mean, it did take Sakata being down into the house by Futaba for it to start, but it still happened. And from this point forward, until volume 10, it's mostly about the main character, Sakata Azuzagawa. Book 5 is technically about Panda Kaede, and Book 8 is technically about other Kaede. But because Book 5 is about Panda Kaede, we'll take the opportunity to talk about her first. Kaede finds out that she's going to become OG Kaede, so she desperately drags herself out of the house, and all the way to school, just so that Sakata wouldn't have to mourn over her and the fact that she never achieved any of her goals. Everything about these goals tell you that she knows she's running out of time. The fact that it says goals for the year and the fact that she's so desperate. She never got to solve her adolescent syndrome because she didn't have time, but she was very mature about herself. She took it as something that would hurt her precious older brother, the person who gave her an identity despite taking his sister away from him. She knew that he loved her despite his refusal to say it later. She never showed how scared she was to him because it would have made him upset. But she kept it in the book so that when it was over he could see her every emotion and how much she loved him. She tried so hard for him, and yet she failed half a step away from her goal. She was incredibly mature for someone who acts like an 8-year-old. She saw what she was to Sakata and understood why him acting the way he did towards her was weird, but she was very happy that he was the first person to treat her like her, not another person that she happened to replace. And she understood that he would feel the exact same way her parents did for the other Kaede, but for her, so she tried to lessen that burden despite feeling scared the entire time. A very mature action despite doing it by herself. Sakata saw the results of this as a failure at first. He saw it as her being one step away from her goal. He cried thinking that she hadn't succeeded despite the look on her face the night before. It took his saviour coming back from the timeline where she gets 0 bitches and is probably beaten on sight by numerous celebrities, including the remaining 5 members of Sweet Bullet, to get him to stop crying, to understand the sacrifice that his sister did, all for his sake. Then the bitchless femcel refuses to leave his house while thinking she's acting as a Chad. I mean, she literally resorted to grooming a minor so that she'd get some, and didn't even succeed at that. She should have shown up in his first year of school to crush his pelvis, she's so wanting to do now that she's living in his house. Well, fuck, it's about time I talk about Sakata. First, let me talk about a massive difference between Sakata in the anime and in the light novel. Sakata in the light novel is less soft with his friends than he is in the anime. There is nothing wrong with the Sakata of the anime being soft with his friends because it makes sense for both of them to take the actions they took. But in the light novel, it's obvious why he's so much less soft on them than he is in the anime. This is because he gets much more softer in the new universe. Sakata doesn't get to deal with his sister on his own. He gets the solutions he would have eventually came to given to him by a meddling time traveller. So what he would have learned from his own experiences, he learnt from the femcel, and he only fully put it into action on his sister, where he was completely soft on and accepting of whatever she did. With everyone else, he was soft, but to a point. Like joking around with Mai or commenting on the fact that Futaba was overly careful. When Panda Kaede died, it happened again. 0 bitches over there refused to let Sakata sort it out by himself or with Mai's help, believing that she needs to help the person who helped her. He only starts being softer on people after his most traumatic moments in his life. after he had to make all those decisions that he didn't want to make. Okay, let's expand this. Sakata is one of, if not the most immature character in this series. But in book 6, he's an immature prick, much like his girlfriend a couple books down. After finding out that he's going to die while Maya eavesdrops, he decides to give up and let it happen. In his mind, he sees it as selfish, to keep on living, if the girl trying so hard has to die in his stead. The worst part about it is that without his input and because of his lack of input, Futaba figures out that he's going to die, willingly telling her after he finds out that she basically already knows. From what we are told, his actions stay the same, but he doesn't really pay much attention, even accidentally skipping cleaning, which leads to one of my favourite scenes in the series. Him and Kamisato have a moment where they are both civil, and she's kind to him. He even comments on the fact that this would have only happened because of his imminent death. At some point, he even gets the attention of Kunami, which he has the goated answer of to the obvious problem that's going on, and he goes, "I'll see you later." GOAT! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT! Even Koga sees that something's wrong. And fucking Naduka backs off when she sees that something's up. And to finalise this amazing flash of friends being worried, Mai Sakurajima cries in front of him because she doesn't want him to die. Well, so did Futaba, that doesn't hit as hard as his girlfriend, who has literally acted away all the emotions she didn't want him to see, breaking down. You mean the girl that was so scared in book 1 and she managed to hide it? It took that to make him consider not doing it. In fact, it did make him not do it. I still consider this immature because he ignored all his friends being worried about him, that he noticed by the way, and only did it when the person he cares for the most started crying in public and declared that she didn't care about her work if he wasn't there. A work that she loved so much that she stayed away from him for. She had shown that she could lessen her schedule for him, but she loved it so she kept it relatively full. And Sakata knew better than anyone how much she loved her work, meaning he didn't realise how much his death would have affected his friends and loved ones. Then he goes and fucks up, visiting his abuser. Cancer patient. Or whatever Goku had. The visit to the ICU was what put the thought back in his mind. He believed that it was his decision if she lived or died, despite there being many ways that it could not happen. Just to extra prove how immature he's acting, he caused adolescent syndrome on himself because he refused to reach an answer for himself. One that he had experienced himself before but not his own. Sakata acts like a child the entire time until Mai dies, refusing to decide for himself and going wherever the latest emotion led him, going from die to survive to die again, because the new situation had created stronger stimulation. It takes actual trauma that will stay with him for life to even get the chance to make a decision. This trauma didn't just affect him, it affected his mates and his sister-in-law. Let me say that again, his immaturity affected his friends, potential family, and him. But at least the friends that aren't in the loop don't get affected. Him and Futaba have to deal with that shit for life. By the time he reached his decision, it was obvious that he wasn't being an idiot and actually thought about it. Not only did he deepen the belief that the accident happened at the aquarium, but after he persuaded Mai to stay there, he didn't just let himself die, he could have easily caused that accident to happen to him again. This doesn't show maturity, all it shows is that he learnt from his mistakes, finally adding the experience to his mountains of maturity. His own experiences this time, not his own told to him by a girl wanting to see her crush in his prime. Where Sakata truly shows his full extent of his maturity is when he runs into a younger version of his precious girlfriend in Book 9. In Book 9, he runs into a slight problem with having to deal with a mother he learned to live without. After finding himself invisible, he runs into the younger Mai and she takes him home. Then he finds himself in the GOAT universe, where he absolutely wrecks shit. He's an absolute menace that solved his sister's bullying problem, still goes to Minigahara, still fucks the most famous 18-year-old in the country, gets an additional girl in his harem by just being better. My god, the only downside in this universe that he didn't throw 2 phones in the ocean. Where our Sakata comes in is he realises that this world works for him way too well, and he decides that he doesn't want to stay there. You know how many of us that would see a world where we are just better and would decide to leave? To him, everything he ever wanted was there. He said that he would be fine with 2 lifelong friends and that it is all he cared for. He loves boredom because it means nothing is going on. And what this world would have given to him was every mistake taken away from him, along with a healthy relationship with his parents he currently had a complex over. And he gets to keep all the bonus stuff he learned from his universe, like housekeeping and cooking. And he gave that all away because he isn't in his universe. They might be the same people, but they're not his people, you know? And in my personal opinion, knowing that you'll give in if something specific happens and actively avoiding that is a very mature act. Yeah, ignore your girlfriend and job so you screw the most annoying self. But where his maturity shows is in relation to his mother. He quickly figured out what was happening and what the origin was, well, at least when he got back. He realized that he thought he had abandoned his mother. He couldn't help her, so he left to help his sister, and there he learned how to become what his mother was for their household. And in his mind, he was replacing her and didn't want to do that. He pushed her away because he didn't want her to know that she was being replaced, therefore causing his mother to not see him. He couldn't have the answer for why that wasn't problematic. His girlfriend finally being there for him, she teaches him that what he is doing is growing up. Where Sakata sits is the most mature character in the series, but as the one with the most amount of screen time, he has the biggest ups and downs. Where his maturity does nothing for him or it solves the entire situation. He has taken the MVP for so many other people's stories because of his maturity and whatever that brings. He knows when to and when not to read the room and how to deal with a person with that information. But most of all, he learned how to figure out his own emotions after everything he went through with big and small emotions, subtle and obvious emotions. He is by far the most deserving of the most mature character in this series. Calm it. His story isn't done yet. You ever heard of Ikumi Akagi? No? Well, I didn't expect you to have. Ikumi Akagi is the class president of Sakata's 3rd year of junior high. And that's about everything Sakata knew of her. He wouldn't have even recognised her if he hadn't run into her in that alternate universe. And her existence is a very different kind of important to him compared to his friends, confidants, potential friend, and family. If there's anything Sakata's consistently failed to do, that's dealing with his own problems and emotions that come with those problems. His maturity relating to himself is minimal, and no one expresses it more than his ex-classmate. Ikumi Akagi represents his own problems. She ties him back to his junior high class. Sakata's entire focus during that year, and for 2 years after that, was his sister. He never looked at how it was affecting him or his classmates, and his junior high classmate brought him back to that time. Not only that, but she gave him a chance to deal with those feelings. Her existence alone made him have a retrospective, because at the time, he didn't care about it. To be fair, no one else would. But with his increased maturity and hindsight at 2020, he was granted a piece of information. The 3rd year of junior high, for the students in his class, was hell. He understood that it was entirely his fault, but he also understood that there was nothing he could do about it. Every emotion he felt for that class had been hidden by the situation with his sister and his mother, and they stayed hidden until Ikumi Akagi was pointed out to him by Toko Kirishima, and they finally emerged when he rushed to go to his reunion to stop a stabbing. And finally, as we reach the end of the book, I can talk about Sakata's maturity. The reunion was of importance to everyone there. They were all afraid to go because of the atmosphere Sakata had created, and Ikumi Akagi, who was still obsessed with her failure, had a whole plan to make everyone feel like a villain. But Sakata had grown since junior high, and he knew that sometimes it was better to leave things be. This is the pinnacle of his maturity. He didn't need to learn from recent mistakes. All he had to do was use everything he had learned during high school and his few months at college. Sakata denies that adolescent syndrome was involved in Akagi's actions and called it a prank. He knew they would still know that it was adolescent syndrome, because they had just watched someone appear out of nowhere and list stuff that had happened during that night that only they would know. He just gave them plausible deniability that they were villains of Sakata's story. They weren't in the wrong, so why be punished? But Sakata still had feelings he had to get through, so he flexes his girlfriend and tells them to go fuck themselves and leaves. If anything, that makes him more mature in my eyes. But what does maturity mean to the Rascal Does Not Dream series? The two books I didn't talk about have very good insight into this as well, so I will be talking about them. Yes, you aren't escaping this time, pantyless idol. First of all, it shows that maturity doesn't just mean acting older, or being older for that matter. What it says is that maturity is knowing how to act in a situation. This means knowing how you feel and trying to understand what the other person might be feeling to act the right way. And we know damn well that doesn't mean be overly cautious and watch every word everyone says to be perfect and be a people pleaser. The series spends an entire book proving that's stupid. Koga's mistakes brought her to finding out that being a people pleaser would fall apart eventually anyway. It seems to put Kunimi at the perfect placement here. Someone who can clearly read minds. Kunimi picked his friends and actively knows when to joke and when not to. He has an incredible unbiased view on everyone he chooses to be friends with and people in general. His girlfriend being important because she showed that she can be kind and incredibly friendly, but a mutual disliking between her and the main cast kinda gets in the way. He likes her for her and doesn't let any of his relationships get in the way of one another. But a very close second would be Sakata in this race. He obviously doesn't care what he says to people when they either piss him off or he just straight up doesn't care, but when put to it, he does read the room. It's obviously why he's so good at getting on people's nerves. He often does say stuff that goes too far, but he instantly figures that out. Acting older puts both of these characters out of the running for most mature because they often joke and have very immature thoughts. What maturity is seen as to the general public is acting stoic and unmoving, unable to joke or have fun, and what these characters know is when to joke, when to be moved, and when to do the exact opposite. But this is obvious to many, to be fair. So what else does this series say about maturity? And that's age doesn't do jack all for maturity. What it says is that experience creates maturity. Most obviously, Mai shows us off, because she's the most different than everyone else in this series. She spent most of her time with adults and had to be grown up because if she didn't, she would likely lose her job. But also, that job allowed her to have an outside view of everything else in her life. Being able to view what it's like to be an adult and have a job made her know what's weird and not weird about being a child. Like school. But let's be real. Sakata is also the best one for this. Not only did his character become more mature as the series went on, but in the OG timeline where future Shoko is from, he is much more mature despite not dealing with the shit our Sakata deals with during late December. We know he's more mature because he dealt with all his problems by himself and without being told what to do by a groomer, showing that when you deal with stuff like that, your life truly changes and it affects you more. Our Sakata couldn't figure that out by himself because he was told it, so he never fully changed. And he gets more mature when he experiences stuff, learning for himself. But what I think Hajime Kamoshida does best is the next thing I'ma talk about. Maturity ain't mean shit if you don't know what to do, and false maturity is bad for you. The second one of those is quite obvious, but the first one is quite special. False maturity is what Kaede experienced in Volume 8. She chose to go to school that would affect her negatively. One that was nothing but stress for her because she thought it was the mature thing to do. Panda Kaede wanted to go to Minagahara, so OG Kaede decided that she would go for her sake. She was stressed putting the application in, she was stressed doing the exams, and she gave up when she ran into a student from her junior high, causing her even more stress, believing that she isn't trying as hard as Panda Kaede. It took a lot of work for her to finally choose a school for her, but it was better than false maturity that forced her into stressful situations. This doesn't apply to Koga because she knew it wasn't mature what she was doing. So into the best part of this. I have, multiple times in this video, said that Sakata is the most mature character in the series, yet he is the lowest point in the entire series. Why would the most mature act the least mature? Because his maturity meant fuck all when he didn't know what to do. But even before that, he was using false maturity, hence why I said both of them together. Sakata's false maturity led him to believe that he was the only thing that would keep Shoko Makinohara alive. We've already covered that, but it led to most, if not all, his friends and even Kamisato realizing that something's wrong with him. But after he sees Mai crying and Shoko dying, he couldn't figure out a solution. His false maturity believing that he would kill Makinohara if he didn't die, and his maturity working overtime to counteract that, causing him to experience the same thing that Makinohara was dealing with. He also created a timeline where he was successfully groomed. Wait. The ages don't match up. Who the fuck was doing the grooming in that timeline? Like, seriously, bro. That's a problem. That's a topic for not my video, or this video. This shows that no matter how mature you are, if you run into a situation where you can't find a solution to, it will mean nothing. Hence why the Pantyless Idol backs this up. In Book 10, the Pantyless Idol gets the ability to read the room. After getting into a fight with the remaining 4 members of her idol group, she somehow gains this ability. She now doesn't shout goodbye to her teacher or ask questions, instead she just looks confused. She now has a group of friends that she copied the fashion and speaking patterns of. This by itself wouldn't be a bad thing. But now that she can read the room, she realised how weird she had been. Then she gets mega famous and it heightens. This causes many problems, like her getting into more fights relating to her idol group, and stress that causes her to be unable to sing. To her, her newfound maturity was born from her being able to read the room, and that caused nothing but problems, and she couldn't figure out what to do. So Sakata took her to the Budokan while skipping college, and then took her to her own concert. After realizing that she was lying about not being able to speak, he talks to her, and she throws her maturity away. It's unlikely that she can't read the room anymore, but it's obvious that she isn't as mature as she was at college. You know, I did a horrible job explaining her book, but in my defense, I've only read it once, even to this day. It's on there. But reading a book 2 times in a row kinda sucks, you know. So what was my take on Hajime Kamoshida's take on maturity? Well, it really wasn't a take, I was just pointing out something I saw. Adolescence, it's all about growing up and becoming more mature, and people are unique in that way. No one grows up the same way, so no one is as mature as someone else. Pointed out by Sakata when he said despite Kunami saying that anyone with a single mother would act like him, people would act out just because they were raised by a single mother. Kamoshida also shows that maturity doesn't take you everywhere, as I said in that last paragraph, showing that it isn't the be-all or end-all to a person, even showing that it's not just related to adolescent syndrome, with multiple books with minimal adolescent syndrome involved. Like Book 5, 8, and arguably 10. 10 is very important to this, as puberty doesn't end until 23, and Sakata and the gang have returned to being 3 years older than me, so 20. It has both a case for why adolescent syndrome might happen into the 20s, but it also never actually confirms that it's adolescent syndrome. It might have been the character growing up. It's kind of weird that I heavily relate to the characters, but I have been in some of those situations they have been. Most accurately, Volume 8 has a similar situation to something recent. Well, I'm sure editor/recording me will talk about that. Probably not, I don't really care. It's weird that I'm growing up alongside these characters, like honestly very weird. And so much that I'm relating to them. Obviously I relate to Sakata on a very weird level. And I know people who are very similar to Futaba, so I know a person very similar to Futaba. I will never say who, ever, because it's kind of cringe, but like, yeah. It's a series with some of the most human characters I've ever read, hence why I relate a character to someone. And I can't wait to see where the rest of it goes. Personally, I hope for a book focused on Kunami and his girlfriend, Kamisato, on the cover. You know, so it could keep the trend of women being on the cover. I'm just saying, if you put Kunami on the cover, my god, you'd have a sudden boost in female fanbase. Oh, and me, I'd be suddenly boosted. Boost! fucking love referencing High School DxD. I haven't watched it in fucking years. I hope when he finally does Kaide's book, it's actually the final book in the series. I think that would be the perfect way to end it. We start off by talking about Kaide, we end off talking about Kaide, and she has the biggest arc in the series. It's unique. 2 characters, Kaide. Great. But by the looks of it, we're getting Sakuta's new college friend and then one of his students. And then after that, I don't know. If you were surprised that Sakuta has students, then you shouldn't have watched this fucking video, dumbass. Well, that's it. I'll hand it off to, well, no one, because I don't really give a shit. So, yeah, bye. I lied. Hi, it's me.